In this video, I'm going to show you how to use Spring Security to secure your Spring Boot application. We're not going to dive in too much in detail. I just want to give you a general idea of how Spring Security works and how we can simply add security to any Spring Boot application. Stay tuned until the end as I'm going to show you how to authorize users and how to authenticate them. I'm also going to show you how to handle different roles. Spring Security is a powerful security framework that's part of the larger Spring Boot ecosystem. It is mainly used in Java applications, especially Spring Boot applications, and we use it to handle authentication, authorization, and protection against common attacks such as cross-site request forgery, session fixation, clickjacking, and cross-site scripting. Let's also differentiate between authentication and authorization. Authentication basically means verifying who the user is, whilst authorization decides what the user is allowed to do, such as accessing specific endpoints. I'm going to show you both of these, authentication and authorization, later on in this video with an actual example. So, Spring Security works as a filter chain in front of your application. Every request first goes through Spring Security filters. These filters check if the request is authenticated and authorized. If everything is fine, the request continues to your app. If not, the request is blocked or redirected to a login page or to an error page. There is a misconception that Spring Security is hard, but I would argue it's quite simple to add to your application. You can simply add the Spring Security dependency to your Spring Boot application via Maven or Gradle, and your app is automatically secured. All endpoints are going to require authentication by default. A default login form is provided by Spring Security, and a random password is generated at startup along with a default user. All in all, Spring Security is a very powerful tool that we are provided as Spring Boot developers. Let's now look at some code and it's all going to make sense. We are going to start by creating a very simple Spring Boot application with one REST endpoint that a client is going to be able to hit. So if you want to follow along, go on Spring Initializer and create a simple Spring Boot project and just add the Spring Web dependency to it. I have opened the Spring Boot project in IntelliJ. So the first thing we want to do is create a new package called controller, and that's where we're going to put our REST controller. And let's create a class called main controller. So this is going to be a REST controller, and let's also add the base mapping API/v1. And let's create a very simple endpoint. So this is going to be a get endpoint. The mapping is going to be welcome. We want to return a HTML string that reads welcome to LeetJourney. So if we create a run configuration and we try to run this, let's see what happens. Security. Let's select the main application class. Let's click apply. Let's click OK. So if we run this, let's hit this endpoint. So it's going to be http:/localhost 8080/API v1/welcome. So if we hit this endpoint, we can see we had nothing to authenticate or any authorization steps. We can simply hit our endpoint. As you can imagine, this is not secure. Anyone can just go to this endpoint and retrieve data. In this case, it's just a simple welcome, but it could be some very sensitive data. What we really want is to go from this to actually something like this. So we want our endpoints to be secured. So we want some kind of security parameter around our endpoints, and we can do that using Spring Security. So let's go back to IntelliJ. Let's minimize this. Let's stop this. And let's go to the pom.xml file. And in here, after starter web, let's add the starter security package and let's sync with Maven. And literally, by just adding this dependency, we have secured our application. Let's just rerun our Spring app. Let's go back here and let's refresh this page. Let's see what happens. You can see we got redirected to a login page. You might be wondering, what's the login page? Why is it here? So this has been provided out of the box by Spring Security. And the next thing you might ask is, what's the username and password? the username is a default username that Spring Security creates by default. So as I was telling earlier, all endpoints are protected and we have been given a login form by default. And the username that is created by default is actually user. And the password, you can find it in the application logs. On startup, a password has been generated for that user called user. And keep in mind, every time you restart the application, a new password is going to get generated. So let's try with the password. And as you can see, our application has been secured, and literally it was as simple as that. There are few changes you can actually do. Maybe you don't want a password to be generated randomly every time. So we can actually go to our application.property file. In here, we can create a new username with a new password, and you can even define roles. So let's just quickly try this. As you can already see from the logs, we don't have a password being printed, and that's because Spring Security knows that we have defined a default user. If we go to our web browser, let's try with Leet and Journey. Let's see if this works. It does as expected. So now you might be wondering, we only have one user with one password, but what if we had multiple users with different roles? Let me show you how to add in-memory users so that we can have a list of users that can be authenticated inside our application. So let's minimize this and let's comment out these users. Okay, so what we want to do, as I said, is have a list of users in memory so that we don't have to do this thing in the application.properties. And to do that, we need to add some security configuration. So I'm going to create a new package called security. And let me create a class called security configuration. So we want to tag this as configuration so that Spring knows that this class contains bean definitions. And we want to enable web security. This is going to enable security for this whole application. So before writing any code in here, let's go back to our diagram. So let me now show you what we're actually trying to achieve in this step. So we have added Spring Security, which in this case is represented by this red border. What we want now to happen is this filter to do some authentication of the users that are going to try to log in to access our REST endpoints. What we want to change is the security filter chain, which is part of this block here. The security filter chain is going to contain some in-memory users. This filter is going to check if the username and password sent by the client is actually part of that user list. Might sound complicated, but it's easier if we just go and code it. So let's go back to IntelliJ and let's create a new bean. And this is going to be a security filter chain bean that is going to act on the HTTP security requests. We call it security filter chain. It's going to take as input a HTTP security. And this is going to be passing the HTTP request. So we take our HTTP and then we want to authorize HTTP requests. We want to add auth. It's a lambda. We want to do auth dot any request authenticated. We want any request coming as HTTP request to be authenticated. And we need to add the form login. This goes here. Form login customizer dot with defaults. And we also need to pass the HTTP basic customizer with defaults. So what this means is that use the form-based login with default settings. So login page, parameter names, and etc. And this second line configures HTTP basic authentication with default settings. And then let's return this HTTP.build object. This is going to return a security filter chain. So you might be asking, where are the user details? Where are the username and passwords? For that, we're going to create a new bean and we're going to call this user detail service. This is going to be providing this in-memory user detail service. As the name says, this is where the user details are going to be stored. Let's say we want 2 users, so let's create 2 user details. First is a normal user, so we're going to do user.with username, where we're going to define the username we want to use, so I'll call it user. We want to add a password. So this is going to be a bit particular. You can see there is this specific annotation no op. What this means is that no encoding is used. We do not want to use this in production. You want the password to not be passed as a plain text. You never want to handle password as plain text. But just for this tutorial, to simplify things, I'm going to put it as a no encoding password. So the password is going to be this one, and this indicates that this is not encoded. And let's also create a role. This is a user role. Then we have built this first user. Let's import this. Let's also create a second user. So I'm just gonna copy and paste. This is going to be an admin user. Password we can leave the same. Admin user is also gonna have an admin role. So we want the admin to be able to do all the operation a user can do and also be an admin. And now simply let's return a new in-memory user details manager with a user and the admin user. We have created an in-memory user detail service. Let's now run this application. Let's see what happens. So if we refresh, let's try with the user we created earlier through application.properties, which is now commented out, just to show that this is not going to work. Invalid credentials as expected. Let's try with the user. So user and password, sign in, and we were actually able to call the welcome endpoint. So you might also be wondering, how can we try with the admin user? Because if you refresh, we can see that we are already logged in and we go directly to the endpoint. What you can do is actually go to the local host 8080 and then type logout, and this is going to log you out. So this way we can now go to our welcome endpoint. If you click enter, we try with admin. And let's try with password. You can also access with this other username. And here you go. You have literally added users in memory, and now they are authenticated to access your endpoints. The next question you might be asking is, what if I want to give specific permissions to specific users to access certain endpoints? Let's go back to our controller, and let's say you have 2 new endpoints, so one for a user and one an admin endpoint. You want the admin endpoint to be accessible only by people that have the role as admin, and the user endpoint to be accessible by people that have the role as user. So how can we achieve that? And that's what I'm going to show you next. Let's go back to our diagram. In this case, we are looking at authorization. Depending on the authorization that the client has, we want to be able to give this client access to different endpoints. What we need to do is actually change our security filter chain. When the request comes, we want to check which user is actually trying to access a resource. And depending on that, we want to allow them to certain endpoints. So let's go back to our Spring Boot application and let's go into the configuration class. Here is where the actual request comes in. As you can see, we have added authentication for any request that comes in, but we want to change this. So what we want to do is add the request matcher. We want the welcome endpoint to be accessible by everyone. We are literally going to add a request matcher for that specific endpoint, and then you're simply going to add permit all. The next one we want to define is the request matcher for the user endpoint. We want people that have a role user or admin to be able to access the user endpoint. And finally, we want to add a request matcher for the admin endpoint. And we want only users with role admin to be able to access this admin endpoint. And of course, we also want to keep authentication for all other endpoints. So let's say you were to add a new endpoint in your main controller. Let's say this one. This will require authentication, and by default, any user will be able to access this. At least this is protected, but the welcome endpoint is going to be accessible to everyone. So this is how we can add this behavior. As you can see, it's nothing special, it's just 3 lines of code. So let's run this and let's see what happens when we go through the browser. If we refresh our page, we are able to access the welcome endpoint without any login or security present. If we try and access, let's say, the admin page using a user that has no authorization, so let's try with the user, we are going to see this error page as expected because this user has no authorization to go here. Ideally, what you want to do is add some kind of better error handling. You don't want to see this white label error page. By mistake, I actually restarted the application, so we're back at the login. So let's try the admin user this time. The admin can correctly access the admin endpoint. We are authenticated with admin user, so if you go to the user endpoint, the admin is also able to see the user. Let's now log out. Let's go to the user endpoint. So we want the user to be able to access this. And as you can see, the user is able to correctly access what we have defined here. Let's do a final logout. And let me also show you that we can access this new endpoint we created using authentication. So we can use any username here. And welcome to the new endpoint. So as you have seen, Spring Security is quite easy to start with. You just need to add a pom.xml dependency and your whole application is going to be secured. You can easily add authentication and authorization through security filter chains. I hope this video was useful, and if you want me to produce more videos on Spring Security, just leave a comment down below and I'll try to get more videos out.